I was reviewing quarterly reports in my downtown office when my assistant mentioned that the new tenant in the commercial space below mine was making waves. The building, a historic property I'd purchased 3 years ago as an investment, housed several small businesses on the ground floor. The cafe, yoga studio, and bookshop had coexisted peacefully until Karen bought the struggling gift shop at the corner unit. Within a week, I started receiving complaints. Karen had appointed herself unofficial building manager, despite having zero authority to do so. She'd printed laminated signs declaring new parking rules, posted them throughout the shared lot, and started leaving aggressive notes on windshields. When the yoga studio owner mentioned it during our monthly tenant meeting, I assumed it was a temporary adjustment period. New business owners often try to establish themselves a bit too forcefully at first. I was wrong. If you're enjoying this story of petty power being checked by the legal system, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World. We've got plenty more stories of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve, and trust me, this one's going to be satisfying. Karen's campaign of control started small but escalated rapidly. She began documenting every perceived violation in a thick binder she carried everywhere. Someone parked slightly over the line? Documented with photographs and timestamps. The cafe put out their sidewalk sign 5 minutes early? Written complaint. A customer's dog waited outside while they shopped? Karen called animal control, claiming the pet was abandoned. The yoga studio owner, Michelle, came to me in tears after Karen filed a noise complaint with the city, claiming the classes violated sound ordinances. Never mind that the studio had been operating for 5 years without issue, or that their space was specifically designed with soundproofing. Karen had somehow obtained a decibel meter and was taking readings through the shared wall at random times, building a case file like she was prosecuting a federal crime. I decided to handle it professionally. I scheduled a meeting with Karen in my office to discuss neighborly cooperation and building harmony. She arrived 20 minutes early, binder in hand, and immediately began lecturing me about my failures as a landlord. Apparently, I was running a substandard facility because the parking lot had a small pothole, the exterior paint was aging naturally on the historic brick, and I hadn't installed security cameras to monitor everyone's comings and goings. We need surveillance everywhere. These other tenants are running wild. There's no order, no structure, no accountability. I've been documenting everything, and when I'm done, you'll see that I'm the only responsible business owner in this entire building. I explained calmly that the building met all code requirements, that her parking rules had no legal standing, and that she needed to stop harassing other tenants. She responded by threatening to report me to every regulatory agency she could think of. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a social media page she'd created called Downtown Building Violations, where she was posting daily complaints about the property, complete with my name and face photoshopped onto various unflattering memes. The reasonable approach had failed spectacularly. Things got worse. Karen started calling the fire marshal about imaginary violations. She filed complaints with the health department about the cafe, claiming she'd witnessed rodents, even though the cafe had spotless inspection records. She reported the bookshop for not having proper accessibility features, despite the building being fully compliant and certified. Each false report required time, inspections, and paperwork. Each one came back showing no violations, but the harassment continued. Then she made her critical mistake. She discovered that one of my properties was in a historical preservation district and started filing complaints with the Historical Commission about modifications to the building. She claimed I'd altered original features, damaged period details, and violated preservation standards. Most of her complaints were completely fabricated, but a few were technical enough that they required detailed architectural reviews. One complaint caught my attention. Karen claimed that a small structural repair I'd made to the rear entrance constituted unauthorized alteration of a historical feature. The repair was documented, approved, and completely legal, but her complaint triggered an automatic review process. During my research to prepare my defense, I discovered something interesting about Karen's own building permit history. Her gift shop space had originally been 2 smaller units. Previous owners had removed a wall to combine them, which was fine, but the work had been done 15 years ago under different ownership. When Karen purchased the space, she'd been required to bring everything up to current code. According to her permits, she'd completed all necessary updates. Except she hadn't. I hired a private inspector, someone who specialized in historical building compliance. His report was thorough. The wall removal had never been properly permitted in the first place. The electrical work in the combined space didn't meet current code. The emergency exit routing was technically non-compliant. The HVAC modifications were undocumented. None of these issues were immediately dangerous, which is why they'd slipped through during her purchase, but they were violations nonetheless. More interestingly, her business license listed the space as a gift shop, but she'd begun selling food items, candles with open flames in violation of fire code, and vintage items that contained materials now considered hazardous. Each category required different permits, licenses, and compliance standards. She had none of them. I could have reported her immediately, but that seemed too simple. Karen thrived on conflict and chaos. A straightforward code violation complaint would just feed her victim narrative. Instead, I made some phone calls. My law school roommate worked for the city's regulatory compliance division. My former business partner sat on the historical commission. My sister was a journalist who specialized in consumer protection issues. I'd invested in several downtown revitalization projects, which meant I knew most of the city council members personally. I wasn't calling in favors or asking for special treatment. I was simply making sure the right people were aware of potential issues that affected public safety and historical preservation. Within a week, Karen received notice that her business would undergo a comprehensive compliance audit. Not unusual for a new business in a historical district, the letter explained. Just a routine examination to ensure all regulations were being met. The inspector would arrive in 30 days. Karen went into overdrive. She immediately filed 3 more complaints against me, each more ridiculous than the last. She claimed I was retaliating against her, that I was trying to drive her out of business, that I was part of a corrupt network of downtown property owners who controlled the city government. Her social media posts became increasingly unhinged. Then the audit happened. The inspector was thorough, professional, and strictly by the book. He documented every violation he found, and there were many. The unpermitted wall removal. The electrical issues. The undocumented HVAC work. The business license discrepancies. The fire code violations from those candles. The lack of proper permits for food sales. The vintage items containing lead paint and asbestos, which required hazmat certification to sell. Karen was given 90 days to bring everything into compliance or cease operations. The cost estimates she received were staggering. Bringing the electrical up to code required opening walls and hiring certified contractors. The HVAC work needed professional redesign and installation. The hazmat certification required expensive testing and disposal procedures. Obtaining all the correct permits and licenses meant fees, inspections, and professional consultations. The wall removal issue was the worst because it had been done so long ago. She now needed to prove it was structurally sound, which meant hiring structural engineers and potentially reinforcing support beams. Her total compliance cost exceeded $80,000. She tried to fight it. She filed appeals, claiming selective enforcement and retaliation. Every appeal was denied because the violations were documented, legitimate, and clearly defined in the building code. She tried to claim financial hardship, but compliance wasn't optional. She tried to blame previous owners, but as the current owner, responsibility fell to her. She posted frantically on social media about corruption and conspiracy. She organized a one-person protest outside City Hall. She sent certified letters to every council member, the mayor, and the local news stations. Nobody cared. She wasn't a victim of injustice. She was a business owner who hadn't done her due diligence and was now facing the consequences. Then came the second shoe. While Karen was scrambling to address the building violations, the city's business licensing division conducted their own review based on the audit findings. They discovered that her aggressive complaint filing about other businesses had included several false statements. She'd claimed under penalty of perjury that she'd witnessed health code violations that never occurred. She'd submitted photographs she claimed were taken at specific locations on specific dates, but metadata showed they were taken elsewhere or heavily edited. She'd made statements about business practices she couldn't possibly have witnessed. Filing false reports with city agencies was a misdemeanor. Multiple false reports could be prosecuted as harassment. The district attorney's office sent her a letter informing her that they were reviewing her complaint history for potential charges. Karen showed up at my office unannounced, pushing past my assistant and barging into a meeting I was having with an architect. Her carefully maintained appearance had crumbled. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was clutching that infamous binder like a shield. "You did this. You destroyed my business because I dared to hold you accountable. You're exactly the kind of corrupt landlord I was trying to expose. I'm going to sue you for everything you have. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did." I waited until she finished her rant. Then I calmly explained that I'd filed exactly one report with exactly one city agency, providing factual information about her building permits. Everything else was the natural consequence of her own actions and the city's routine enforcement of regulations she'd been violating since the day she opened. The false report investigation had nothing to do with me. That was the district attorney responding to her own documented behavior. She didn't believe me. She continued shouting, making increasingly wild accusations, until building security arrived and escorted her out. She was banned from the property except to access her own business unit. 3 weeks later, Karen received a citation for filing false reports. The charge carried a potential fine and possible jail time. Her appeals for the building violations had all been denied, and her 90-day compliance deadline was approaching with little progress. She'd spent her money on lawyers instead of contractors, which meant she wasn't any closer to meeting code requirements. Then came the final blow. The Historical Commission, during their review of her compliance issues, discovered that the vintage items she'd been selling included several pieces that were potentially stolen historical artifacts. Nothing major, mostly items that should have been reported as found historical property rather than sold commercially, but enough to trigger an investigation. When they reviewed her supplier documentation, they found she'd been purchasing inventory from unlicensed estate sales and auctions without proper provenance verification. The commission ordered a full inventory review and seizure of questionable items pending investigation. This required her to close the shop entirely while they cataloged everything, which meant zero revenue while her bills continued mounting. Karen tried one last desperate move. She attempted to sell the business and transfer the lease. I received the paperwork requesting my approval for the lease transfer. As the building owner, I had final say over commercial tenants. I denied the transfer. My denial was perfectly legal. The lease agreement included a clause requiring landlord approval for any transfer, and given the current code violations, pending legal charges, and historical commission investigation, approving a transfer would potentially make me liable for facilitating the sale of a non-compliant business. Any lawyer would have advised the same decision. Karen had no buyer, no money, mounting legal bills, a compliance deadline she couldn't meet, and a criminal charge pending. She'd spent months filing hundreds of complaints against everyone around her, documenting every perceived violation, playing building inspector and self-appointed enforcer of rules that didn't exist. Now the actual rules, the real regulations, the legitimate code enforcement she'd weaponized against others, had turned on her with devastating precision. I was in the parking lot one afternoon when I saw her loading boxes into her car. The gift shop windows were dark, covered with paper. She spotted me and froze, boxes balanced awkwardly in her arms. For a moment, we just stood there in the afternoon sun. Understanding dawned across her face as she processed the full scope of what had happened. Not retaliation. Not corruption. Not conspiracy. Just consequences. Every violation she'd faced was real. Every fine was legitimate. Every enforcement action was standard procedure. She'd spent so much energy trying to control everyone else that she'd never ensured her own house was in order. And the person she'd targeted most aggressively owned the building where her failed business was located, knew exactly how the system worked, and had simply made sure the right people were looking in the right places. Her face went pale as she realized that her obsessive documentation, her constant complaints, her aggressive enforcement mentality, had created the very paper trail that destroyed her. If she'd just run her business quietly, none of this would have happened. If you enjoyed watching entitled Behavior Meet Its Perfect Match, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Karen Eat World. We've got tons of stories about people who learned that sometimes the system they try to weaponize has a way of turning around and biting back. Hit that notification bell so you never miss the next satisfying story of justice served cold.